Hello, everybody. We continue our video blog on making planning work, and we deep dive now into more details of letting you know how this model could actually be enabled with the SAP technologies. So from the SAP technologies, what we have in mind is really to leverage the best of the SAP IBP, but as well to leverage really the SAP Analytics Cloud and all operational systems. So what you see here on a slide is that we actually combine the process requirement which are satisfied in the SAP IBP. So really your demand planning, commercial planning your drivers for the demand related to the products, planning your inventories, feasible supply, which consists of the capacity planning, inventory, material requirement, distribution, transportation, and maybe even subcontracting and external manufacturing, right? This is actually being addressed on a SAP IBP level. Then it's combined with the SAP Analytics Cloud to planning your revenues, costs, profit, full P&L, and combining with the actuals. Therefore, really to complement the planning solution, you need to think of it how to put into the process architecture and the IT landscape those systems which will provide additional information to this planning tools. So then actuals will come from the S/4HANA standard rates, standard sales pricing will come from it. Maybe some additional commercial conditions for maybe when you're discussing an opportunity for the tender will be captured in CRM and not directly maybe in SAP IBP. Planning your headcounts will come most probably from supplementary systems, or it will be done directly in SAC. Key element of the solution is really about connecting the planning solution, taking the best out of them, and actually complementing them with the additional information. There is quite a consequence of this way of doing planning, and I will try to elaborate on it in this video. So one of the key elements is for the process and technical architects is to consider the business model requirements into the technical design of SAP IBP SAP Analytics Cloud S/4 and the other solutions connected together really. So it's really about, on the left-hand side, I try to articulate just the key ones. How do you sell your products? It will actually determine what type of a granularity is needed in your demand planning and the revenue planning process, how the transactional processes are being executed for sales order processing part. So really from the quote through the shipments to billing and the return. So how this is being recording, what type of a movement type are being used. So this is critical because at the end later in the corresponding technical design book, you might need to really connect this specific business model element and to the really configuration on the tool, and then as well map these processes because the data has to flow from the transactional and operational system to the planning tools. I list many more consideration for you, meaning how you actually produce and then supply the products. Example of it is like how much of the external manufacturing you use, maybe use as well manufacturing execution system, maybe some of the data which is needed to take a planning decision is there. So really mapping this is a critical and a very important element. Last not least is really about as well how the sales organization, as an example in point number 2.9, is being structured. It is important because later on you have to reflect that with the appropriate master data elements, because you will do the planning as close as possible to what the business organization is, because then it's easier to get the best insights of this specific organizational unit. I'm talking about maybe the sales organization is organized by the sales channel, by the key account, or a type of a business, right? Because they are different configuration. And this should be reflected in your data model. Therefore, you see certain group of the consideration for your technical design. Last not least is really to putting into the whole landscape and the technical architecture, those systems which need to be taking care in the overall enterprise business planning. On the bottom, we actually as well list some example of what type of product characteristics will have an impact on the technical design. So example of it is that how the pricing discounts, counts of sales should be actually made for the specific group of the product. Then it will determine what type as well of the actuals you need to sort of integrate into the planning solution, because planning will actually learn from what happened in the past, and this type of a data is required to do the planning. It's very important as well to understand which cost, for example, how the costing process looks like in your company, because it will determine how much details or how much automation, predictive functions you should actually use when planning your costs, and specifically cost elements. Because in your business model there could be, and definitely are, differences between the how critical the specific cost element is versus the other. We have examples where type of a product, for example, is determining that the transportation cost will have a huge impact. Example of it, that the product is very light, and then transportation costs will actually have the huge impact on the whole profitability. Therefore, planning your transport with more extensive manner in the planning solution would then make sense, because of the fact that contractually you allow your distributors, for example, to return the product. Then it would mean that potentially from the financial standpoint, you need to plan certain returns and reserve the money for those returns, because you invoice the customer and then there will be returns. So those returns have to be accumulated in the financial planning space as an accrual or a provision for the future returns. And there are much more other of it, but still what we're trying to explain here is that differences in the business model and even across the divisions within the one company would require a little bit of the different thinking how to do the specific part of the planning process in the specific tool. And then architects process and the IT architects would really at the beginning of the transformation product need to sit together and determine the best solution for it. In the model, which we will present further on in this and the other videos, we will actually share some hints how to do that. So what we outline here is that in orange, that IBP with combined with the financial planning, it is being executed in the SAP technologies in our model on two systems, because we take the best out of it. More of the rationale we explain later, but still in this video. So we take the best of the SAP IBP to plan your introduction of the product, but monetization or maybe a health of your portfolio we assess in the SAP Analytics Cloud. Therefore, connection between those two tools for this process steps, which addresses the which helps to address properly a product review, not from the volume, but as well from revenue and cost planning perspective, is an objective of this model. And it's being addressed through the connection of SAP IBP and SAC. So in the second process step, we're talking about planning your volumes, but as well planning your revenues through your drivers, through your predictive functions, through the scenario planning. But then it means really that taking the best of those tools has to be planned accordingly. So we take the best of SAP IBP and its statistical forecasting engine, and we take the best of the SAC to plan your revenues through the value driver tree, stories, and as well predictive function embedded there. But if we continue further, it means as well that we actually planning your supply and combining the planning of supply with planning your costs. Then taking decision will have truly be done in the full financial impact, right? And in this case, we as well connect those two solutions together in order to plan a supply and its costs. So really planning a future changes on your cost or a cost element even, which we present in a moment. Further on, as we discussed earlier, we're talking about connecting the net revenue planning, planning your demand in volume with the planning your supply and cost into one set of the figures, then on a scenario level. And this is being done through the integrated reconciliation and planning your gross profit. But as well, here you see that there is a stronger connection to the financial planning tool like SAP Analytics Cloud. So actually not all of the activities in the traditional sales and operation planning process then are executed in SAP IBP. Actually, mostly because of the financial impact, the things actually shift towards the SAP Analytics Cloud. And then when you make decisions in the management business review, expand the portfolio of the information with the lean financial forecasting, and you connect all the information as well for the analytical purposes, the more you use the tool like SAP Analytics Cloud. So on a system side, what it is very critical is to assign as part of the process activities, what is the leading and master system for the specific group of activities in the process step. So on the left-hand side, you see a first process step, which is a product review. So we, as we try to articulate, we leverage the framework of IBP, but we expand it with the full financial planning activities. So what it means here is that we actually leverage the information about the transactional data, your master data of the bill routings, bill of materials routing, some maybe data from the external systems like here, when you're planning your new product implementations. But here it's not only about planning your implementation from the phase in and phase out perspective, from the volumetric side, when it will happen, but as well planning your costs or planning your price as part of this introduction. And last not least, comparing this to the budget. Therefore, we actually have here a combined information from the volumetric side, which is provided in SAP IBP, financial side, which is provided in SAP Analytics Cloud, and S4 or the other systems where the data is needed to plan your implementation of the portfolio or to assess a health of your portfolio. Okay, let's continue. In the second process steps, we talk about a demand review. And when you see here, those are the activities which you plan as part of your demand planning and planning your revenues. So it's important to have a transactional information because you're planning maybe, as we discussed earlier, your sales of the products. In order to have that, you should have actuals which are coming from S4 system. Or your ERP system. You might have essays of the products done in the kits or sort of assemblies or sets. Then you would need to have a master data which comes from the exactly ERP system. You might have a case where you sell the products through the consignment model, then you would have to have a proper integration about the consignment information about your inventories in your customer consignment warehouse. For the returns and planning the other elements, it's critical to map that as we discussed earlier and to get the data for the planning purposes. Then as a reference data, we actually use the budget which is being developed in the SAP Analytics Cloud. And then we use the best, as we said earlier, from SAP IBP and SAC. So demand planning your statistical forecasting baseline should actually happen in SAP IBP, because this is a tool where this is being done in a very extensive way with the coverage of the huge functionality. Planning your drivers related to the products is very helpful to do that. Planning your bottom up, top down, because as we discussed earlier, capturing the signals from the different stakeholder group would require a flexibility in the configuration of the tool, which will help you to really recognize the differences between the granularity they talk about. And this is being done through the configuration of the SAP IBP. And then, as we discussed earlier, we need this volumetric information for the product to be complemented with the full monetization of your net revenues. So you're planning your gross to net conversion, you're planning your all revenue streams coming from the product, but as well from the services, licenses. Your business models are very rich, so then capturing those financial revenue streams is as well critical here. Planning your revenue recognition, connecting, for example, to the consignment model, it's very important, but as well, it means that you have to plan the process in the 2 steps, because consignment is done in the 2 steps, planning your fill up and planning your revenue recognition. So still, it means that you need to really take into consideration the business model and assigning activities to the right system. Planning your cost of sales, as we discussed earlier, is as well very often a critical element in various business models in different industries. Planning, and this could be really a significant element in your profitability. And last not least, having capabilities which in a really large extent support your analytical capabilities, as well as part of the planning, combined with planning, is important, and this is being done in the SAP Analytics Cloud. In the further step, we have a step called the supply review. So you see that step number 3 from our chart. And for that, we're talking about planning your supply planning elements and planning them on a, I would say, on a stream level. It means that you would need to plan your capacity for the labor and machine potentially in a separate data streams, because of the fact that you would need to plan a labor cost or a machine cost in a different way with the different drivers, right? So for the sum of the work center or a cost center, labor will be more important than the machine. Therefore, planning your cost would be enabled accordingly. If you plan in a supply chain planning solution those things in a separate, it would enable a different ways of planning of your costs. Material requirement planning, planning your inventory in the safety stock could be fully monetized, because some of the planning of the material cost rates and, for example, weighted average cost of the capital could be as well supported through the planning of your costs. Last not least, as we discussed, another element of the supply planning is planning your transportation and distribution. So if you plan this through the specific type of the mode of the transport or transportation lanes, it will give you a facility to plan your cost more in detail if your business model requires, as we said, because maybe for some industries it's good enough to plan your transportation as a percentage of your sales, or maybe it is required to do it on a tender or a specific even a sales order level, right? So maybe because it's being that big, it has to be replenished to the customer, not in a one go, but gradually over the year. So actually planning the cost or a specific element of the cost might be different depending on the business model, but having a flexibility to do that is a job of the process and the IT architects. Therefore, what we're presenting here is a way you can actually think about the planning your architecture. So here, as you see on the bottom as well, in this third process steps called the supply review, we need to have a transactional data, transaction information about what has been produced, about scrap rates, about your bill of material, routing, everything, because at the end, we will plan most of them in the future. So planning changes of your cost rate for the work center exposed to in high extent to the labor or to the machine will be planned in a different way than the planning changes of the transportation costs, right? But still, as part of this process step, we will do all. In the step number 4, as we discussed in previous slides, we discussed the planning of your gross profit. Therefore, you need to consider information from SAP IBP, which is planning your demand planning, supply planning, combining with the cost, combining with the net revenue plans done in SAC. And you complement this information with the information from the source systems and the transactional systems, and then really you can actually do the planning of your gross profit, because many of the drivers in the business, the data for those drivers in the business could actually come from the S4 or really other systems. And finally, one of the last elements of the assignment of the process steps to the leading system is a planning of your management business review, planning your analytic capabilities, and lean financial forecasting. So here you see that really the more focus is to leverage SAP Analytic Cloud and the transactional data than SAP IBP itself, because we actually going beyond the traditional supply chain planning solutions. We go into the space of the enterprise-wide planning, so business planning, and then we actually have to have a solution which actually satisfy the requirement of this process. So meaning really a full planning of the profit and loss, combining the actuals with the plans on the scenario level, using your predictive functions, and really doing a planning and analysis in the same time, where SAP Analytic Cloud will be a solution for it. So one of the key elements which I wanted to highlight in this video is this assignment of the process step to the right solution. So in this case, to the right system. Then with that in mind, you can actually figure out how to plan your integration of the data flows and plan in more depth the technical solution. We said that we will share a little bit on the rationale why we actually developed the model in that way and not the other way. One of the key rationale was actually to take the best of the SAP IBP and SAP Analytic Cloud. And so what it means is that we take the best of SAP IBP for the supply chain planning parts of the process. So really, as we highlight here on the left-hand side, taking the supply planning engine, taking the demand planning engine, which is very strong in SAP IBP, and complementing this with the planning of your financials with the very impressive driver-based planning through the value driver tree planning in SAC, planning your variable and the fixed cost there as well on a detail, on an aggregated level, and finally planning your P&L there. So this is like really taking this to the level that you take the best of the solutions when designing the process architecture and technological and technical architecture. But there is a second side of this thinking as well, presented on the right-hand side. You can sort of think of it on a high level that you assign the process element through sort of logically to where they belong to. SAP IBP is not for the financial planning, and SAC is actually not for the planning your supply chain, because it is really pretty complex to plan your supply chain. That's why optimization of your supply, it becomes an important thing when making a profitable planning. So really, maybe we can simplify the thinking, planning your volumes, planning certain commercial activities, right? Planning your introduction of the new products, planning your supply should happen in SAP IBP, but monetization, planning your price, cost, planning your revenues and profit should happen in a SAP Analytic Cloud, in a simple words. I would like to thank you very much for the attention. And this was the second part of this video, where we actually talk about integrated business planning combined with financial, but more from the system perspective. In the further videos, we will actually do a deep dive into the model itself, with showcasing you how it's done in the system.